Well, thanks for coming along. I really appreciate you choosing my talk over the others that are on today. Let me introduce myself, first of all. My name is John Clapham. I'm a coach, predominantly. I've studied very hard for that. I'm an International Coaching Federation PCC, which means well over 500 hours of paid coaching, some really nasty exams, and the excruciating process of being videoed while you coach. That's one part of me, which is about helping people to think well, figure out what they want to do, facilitating quality thinking. The other part of me is essentially around ways of working and some of the aspects that you will know from an agile or digital team coach. So getting things done with organizations around change and being more efficient and lean and all the great things you've heard about today. I've been learning to orienteer in the last year, which you might say is humbling. This is my cat and long-term mentor, Cleo. I live in Bristol. I'm part of Green Tech Southwest, and what we do is provide a showcase to innovative technical solutions where tech can be almost anything from figuring out how to reduce carbon in your cloud provision to building a tiny hydroelectric dam in the stream down the end of your garden. So if you look online, you can find us. We do live and broadcast events, so you can find those remotely if you like. And that's me. So I work with, I'm independent, and I work with companies that care about people, planet, and performance. Performance matters, right? Because I personally believe ultimately getting things done is really motivating, and we like that. Imagine an absence of frustration and just things working smoothly. So performance is an important thing. I'm supposed to start with why. Why am I here? Why would you want to know about this stuff? But instead, I'm going to go straight to horseshoe crabs. Now, which I'm sure you all expected. Horseshoe crabs are pretty fascinating animals. They haven't evolved for about 450 million years. There's no evolutionary pressure for them to do so. And you might work with some people like this. Well, this slide, though, is really to make the point that if you only take one thing away, one thing about coaching, one thing about working towards change, is to prefer or look for people who are genuinely customers for change, the people who are willing to experiment, try things, and do something new. And I hope that today you all are. Maybe give me a wave, show of hands, smile, grimace, anything like that, if you're willing to try something differently after what you've heard today, not just in mine. Thank you very much. Let's get back to why then. So I'm going to share a technique. It takes a lot of learning to use the full system, but you don't have to. And we're in the afternoon. We're quite a long way through a lot of brilliant, informative, insightful talks. So what you can do is just sort of calm down, reduce the expectations on yourselves, and just take away some of the spirit of this. This is more about the stance and how to show up and how to think in conversations than it is learning a long process. Some of you will be familiar with things like GROW, coaching process to facilitate thinking. That's not where we are today. We're just about how to appear and how to get the best out of your conversations, and to some extent when you're talking to yourself. This method was a bit of a revelation to me, as it is many people who learn it. It helps you to get unstuck. It helps to make your meetings more effective, to find a sense of direction, make progress towards goals, and to notice more opportunities and things that will be helpful. So it's pretty ubiquitous. More formally then, you can use it in meetings, one-to-one coaching, but also your general interactions. The one I always think about is those classic, in the old days when we all had desks, right? If you remember desks, where in offices where other people were, people would rock up and say, "Can I have a word?" And you'd sort of follow them to an office without really knowing what you were getting yourself into. Yeah, and everyone's sort of clenching up now. It's really useful for those. And you can use it to coach yourself and consider what you want to do. Crucial point here, works with what you do now. It's entirely compatible with almost every other coaching method, except possibly shouting and trying to control everything. You don't need to buy anything. You could buy a book if you like, but there's some great resources online, no certification required. And I also believe that you can, unlike a lot of things, a little knowledge is fine. You won't get yourself in trouble if you just remember a bit of this. You don't need the whole system. So go ahead and try stuff. A lot of it is based on this book, a wholly remarkable book. Mark McCurgo and Paul Z. Jackson, they distilled a method rooted in therapy and applied it to leadership coaching and coaching of teams. It's an incredibly readable book as well. Pick it up. It's been around for a long time, so you'll also find environmentally friendly recycled copies and second-hand copies. There's also a new edition if you want to stay up to date. So this thing I'm going to talk about, and don't worry, I will get there. I will eventually get to what I'm going to talk about, probably about 5 minutes before I'm due to stop. Solution focus. This is what it's called. This is the name of the method. Academically rigorous, been in use for decades. There's only one thing. I hate the name. Because it's not about solutions. And I'm sure there were some of you looked at this talk on the bill today and thought, solutions, we don't do that. We don't jump to solutions. We don't like solutionizing. They don't really mean that. What they mean is direction. They mean knowing your way forward, having clarity around where you're trying to go, your heading, if you like. So that's one part of it. And this is super important, right? You'll see this slide a lot. It's a metaphor for knowing where you're going and your environment. So if you're trying to get to the top of this peak here, for example, that might be very easy. You can just see it, you can plan what you want, but what if you're going for the other one across the saddle? Now we're into a longer walk. What if the weather changes? Who am I going with? There's a lot of different things about direction. What I'd suggest you don't do is have two directions, which actually, if you look at company strategy, often do. They kind of smush everything they might do into one thing. Because it's very hard to plan for that, to gather your resources and your capabilities and head in sort of two directions, or a might go in a direction. So, choosing direction with focus. Focus, though, just one more little nitpick, and then I really will get on with it. It's not about a myopic focus. There's this thing I call penicillin moments. A lot of you all know that penicillin was discovered by accident. Someone happened to have the time and presence of mind to investigate an unexpected happening, something that wasn't on their plan. It wasn't in their focus. So while we are putting a lot of attention into where we want to go and what we want to do, we're not myopic and we're definitely not blinkered about it. So, welcome to my talk then. It's called Choosing a Direction, Noticing, Thinking and Doing Things That Will Help Go Towards It. The acronym is... yeah, anyone want to have a go? I'm not even going to try today. Now, there's far more sensible people who wrote the book have suggested we use this acronym, SIMPLE, as a reminder of the kind of things that we should be thinking about if we're going to approach in a solution-focused way. Of course, if I use direction, this would become DIMPLE, which isn't great, or purpose would make it PIMPLE, which is why I'm not in marketing. It's a backronym, but it's very deliberate, because we're surrounded by complexity. Some organizations really reward complexity. They reward all those long words. They reward us with for producing fancy diagrams and quite abstract concepts. This is a reminder to keep things simple overall, and then to pay attention to each letter of SIMPLE so that we do the minimum necessary. It's a lean approach to coaching and change. So, have a look at this picture a minute. What do we think the problem is? Forgot the picnic box? Could be. Nice, thank you. Any more? Engine issues? Yeah, great. They're frying an egg somewhere. Yeah, it could be. So the bottom line is we don't know what the problem is, but we can all make assumptions about it, right? And all the assumptions are sensible. What we are really interested in is what is wanted. And in terms of this coaching method, that's the solution. So what those people might just want is to go home. And rather than trying to fix the engine, as suggested, you can get a taxi, you can get a breakdown recovery, you could maybe let the handbrake off and coast home if they're in the right place. Or they might just be looking for their picnic. That's a great suggestion I haven't had before. But, you know, it could be nothing to do with that engine. They could have just opened the wrong door to find the picnic. I have a friend who has a car very much like this. He does reliability challenges, so he tries to drive these old vehicles around the UK. For him, the solution, what is wanted, is to learn how to look after that car and maintain it well. So there's a couple of messages in this, right? One is, we can assume the problem, but we often don't know what is wanted and especially what the solution is. And if you think about these people who are stranded for ages looking in the engine, when the breakdown people come and take them home, the length of time you've had a problem is not tightly coupled to the amount of time it takes to solve or remove it. But we often think it is. We often engage in a bunch of investigation and discovery about the problem and diagnostic, when really a better understanding of where to go and what would help us to go there would be more useful. And you can see this in your retrospectives, right? You do get what you pay attention to. So I wonder if you could just think about how long, if you run something similar to this or any of the other formats, how long you spend in the stop space compared to the more forward-looking and potentially useful continue and start, where start is a set of useful small steps. The thing about stop is it's almost bike shedding. It's really convenient to just spend all of our time in that space. It's psychologically safe. Generally, everyone agrees what we should stop doing or what the problem is. And then suddenly the retro's gone and we can all go about our business and carry on with the same patterns that have taken us to recall the stops. Arguably, the place to put attention then, continue and start. Let me give you an example. I was in a meeting once with some fairly senior managers, and this is the kind of stuff I was hearing about the teams. They just aren't. I don't see them doing. I expected more. And this, of course, is grounded in the problem. But as a practitioner, it doesn't actually help us work out what they want and how to get there. And you can just ask questions to disrupt this. You can say, great, but that doesn't tell me what I need to work on or what we need to work towards. And, doing that elicited actually, despite these sort of negative sounding phrases, doing that elicited some pretty positive stuff. What they wanted was the teams to work with autonomy and to essentially let them know if they needed support or a hand. But it took 3 or 4 pauses to remove the negative talk and the what we don't want. It's very hard to work with the absence of something. You could try an exercise if you like. You could go to the station, there's one just over there, and you could try and buy a ticket for a destination without naming the destination. Just say where you don't want to go. See how you get on. There's another aspect of this, which is that if you do that, if you don't have a direction, someone else is likely to find one for you, and that will probably be the railway security as they cart you out of the building. Now, there's a slightly serious point to that, because if you think about all of the inputs that you're getting from social media, from media in general, they are a bit like that. They are potentially telling you about things you're not that interested in or you don't want, and that are not taking you in the direction that you would like to go. So next time you crack open your phones, you might like to think about what you actually want to do and what matters to you, and compare that to what inputs you're getting. There was a point earlier about sort of good stuff in, good stuff out. Finally, pop pickers. Does anyone remember this tune? Is it fully in your head now? Is it a proper earworm? Excellent. Would it have been easier if she just told us her name? Right, so I'm fully losing my time now because my phone's gone off, but we'll just try and get through it. A thing we talk about is how important interactions are, what we can see between us, rather than trying to guess what's going on in people's heads. Any quick guesses about what's happening in this picture? Icebreaker, yeah. Tell me about the body language. What are you noticing? Anything? Difficult conversation, yeah, could be. So we've got frozen shoulders, we've got an offer, but along with that is this turned head. Some interesting stuff, right? All good guesses. Point is, we don't know. So what we can do is to work with what we can see. And if we don't, we're on this sort of path to madness, because we're trying to profile, we're trying to guess what's going on in people's heads, and we're into a territory that is about the people rather than what is co-created between them. Okay? And this can be quite freeing, actually, if you turn off all of that diagnostic, turn off all of the psychology. And, I've studied a lot of psychology for the coaching, been in a lot of great talks about these sort of areas. The more I hear and the more I try, the less inclined I am to profile or guess what anyone is thinking, and particularly their motivations. All we can do is work with what they said and what we see. The in-between and the co-creation also applies to a lot of our favorite concepts. This is the notion of aligned autonomy. We often, especially leadership layers, people will say things like, all right, we want teams to work with autonomy. Go. Great. Okay. How have you done that? If you just say that, the teams are going to be working somewhere in a continuum between absolute neglect and too much control, unless we co-create and work out what aligned autonomy looks like for us and what it looks like for an individual and a team and what is needed to do that. These things are really interactional, and it is almost dangerous to go into them without some level of conversation. The other angle is our interactions and what's going on in between us and the system. I'm aware there's some very good system thinkers in the room, so I have to tread carefully. As a coach, I'm often involved in these sort of performance conversations, improve your productivity, they say, and they assume it's about the one person only. Occasionally it is, but mostly it's about all this other stuff that's happening. And so there's a couple of things in the coaching frame then. First of all, we are gently coaching the system to enable people to perform and be better at what they do. And we're also, again, just working with what we see and the person's place in the system rather than guessing what else is going on around them. Okay. So, maybe the chuckle there, if someone had builders like this then, or this is what it looks like when they do DIY at the weekend, I wonder. Making use of what's there is really important, because there's so much that's already working. If you're dealing with a fatigued team or a slightly disgruntled team or a team that people are telling isn't performing well, you can use the following retrospective format. Tell me what's working. Just sit there. And often teams are really slow to recognize all the great things that are already happening. But we really want to build on that. We want to amplify what's working. So make use of what's there. Doctor Who, of course, was an absolute master of this. He is always finding things, he, she, or they, I think, actually, if you think about all the Doctor Whos. So Doctor Who, then, was always finding stuff to work with to get out of impossible situations, which came from observation, which came from knowing what they wanted to do and finding things that would help them. So in the coaching method, we call these counters. It's a pun. I'll get ready to watch everyone wince because they count towards the solution. They are things that we already have that we can pile up and look at and go, yeah, wow, that's awesome. I already know how to do this. We can find those in the past, present, and the future. If you're involved in changing an organization or inspiring a team, you can be a detective for these things. Learn to sense them, learn to call them out. And again, that can really empower and help teams, especially if they're slightly on the back foot. Good examples of this also come from, particularly in a coaching conversation, if we're really stuck in our current situation, where can we borrow a counter or inspiration from another situation? So we can talk to our thinkers and say, hey, well, is there a time when you've been able to do this or been in a situation like this and you've got through it and you've done well? What can you borrow from your past? Classic one is people who have been involved with sports teams or raising their performance in certain areas, or they've been through some adversity. There's a lot that counts from that they can borrow, and then they can go into the new situation with confidence. All right. Let's talk about possibilities a minute. When am I supposed to finish? I'm so sorry. 20 minutes, perfect, thank you. Possibilities then. So we talked about what's already there and what's working and how we might find those things like detectives. We still need to think about the future and where we're going. And this is something we call stretching the world, which is the notion of having exploratory conversations which will expand someone's world or what they think about, which is not in a controlling manner, it's an invitation always, where the style of thinking will help them with what they want to do. So Jitesh talked about, earlier he talked about uncertainty and encouraging curiosity, right? And we can see some stretching of the world in that, perhaps, where the first time he talks to stakeholders and says, hey, those questions were great. I think it's something like, what are you uncertain about? Probably the first time that anyone was asked that, they're sort of like, whoa, what's this? I don't know how to answer that. I've never thought about that before, right? 2 or 3 times later, 2 or 3 meetings, it starts to become habit, right? And then they probably start to think about that without being prompted, which is a little bit of stretching of the world. Stretching of the world in the mind is a bit like stretching of a muscle, right? We need to practice. Over time, it becomes easier, it becomes more habitual, and more likely to happen, and crucially, less tiring and less effortful. Okay? So, let's have a little practice now. Coaches in the room, what is this for? It's not a trick question. Moving heavy things, great. Any more thoughts? Carrying your baggage, having fun? Yep, okay, perfect. Just one more. Carrying drunk people out of the pub. I would love to hear about that afterwards. Yes, of course, it's for all those things. You can use it for any of these things. The one that came up when I had a look around, you can use it decoratively, you can use it as art, and of course you can use it for this. Now, these things that you can use another thing for are called affordances. There's a load of brilliant studies by this chap called James Gibson about the notion of affordances. There's a couple of things. There's the accumulation of all the affordances, everything that you could use something for. And then there's the affordances, everything that an organism can use something for. There's a great chat at lunchtime about UX and accessibility and how if you're someone who has trouble with their fingers or arthritis, the affordances on your mobile device are reduced because you're not able to press so well, you're not able to press so accurately. So this whole stretching the world concept is increasing the affordances available. It's in both, well, mostly mentally, but potentially physically. So we're stretching the world, we're expanding possibilities. And if we think about these affordances, we also specialize in them in our careers. So product people and entrepreneurs, they're great at seeing opportunities that they can capitalize on that we might not notice ourselves, right? And again, that's partly because their worlds are stretched or specialized towards seeing that stuff, and because they have the focus, in the solution-focused sense, that they know what they're looking for, right? And so they're slowly learning to get better at spotting things that will help them to go in that chosen direction. Language. So when I was learning all this stuff, language is the one that really challenged me. I really struggled with this. I love language. I quite often sort of absorb strange language. Like if I go and see Shakespeare, I'll have to stop myself from talking in that sort of archaic language, which is pretty annoying for people. I tend to consume accents quite readily and then replay them without really knowing. And of course, in our business lives, there's an awful lot of specialist language that we can easily absorb and start using. Some of that's necessary to fit in, right? But some of it isn't all that helpful. And so in Solution Focus, we think about simple words. Again, back to simple. We think about describing things using unambiguous terms, and we prefer to use multiple, simple, smaller words to describe concepts and complex things. The advantage of simple descriptions, and particularly if we're going to do something like encourage people to go to the top of a hill, is that it becomes more real in the act of describing something. You talk about describing it in exquisite detail. So now we're imagining, A, what it's like to be up there and why it's worth it, and B, what it takes to get there, both in terms of challenges, opportunities, and the effort to get to the top. If we describe that in simple and unambiguous language, then we all have the same idea, which is incredibly useful for working together. Here's a good example. This is Anthony Grant. He's an amazing solution-focused practitioner. He lives in academic circles as well. So what all this really says is, don't think about problems, think about solutions and where you want to go. And there's paragraphs of jargon to do that. Let me give you a quick example. So sitting in a room with a bunch of highly paid people, and I don't know if this will relate or not, but essentially engineering are arguing with product. No, not relatable at all, as I suspected. They're arguing about the backlog, and they have been arguing about it for quite some time. And I'm sort of sat there quietly totting up the dollar value of this conversation so far, which seems to be going nowhere and going round and round and round. And so when there's a pause, I ask them, could we just take a minute to define the backlog? And there's definitely a bunch of people that looked at me as if to say, well, hang on a minute, you're the agile person. Isn't that your job, and shouldn't you already know it? So you definitely have to take some risks if you're going to try this stuff. But it's like an intervention. It's like a bold thing to disrupt conversations. And so saying things like, what do you mean by X? Can we just clarify what we mean by Y? So product said, well, the backlog is a list of items prioritized by by user and strategic value. Engineering said, the backlog is a list prioritized in pull order or a sequence of work. So what you can see is a single list can't be sorted by two different regimes, at least certainly not in that kind of scenario. So immediately, by talking about the meaning of the word, we are able to find where the disagreement is and seek some common ground and then move forward. So we've stepped out of the jargon, we've used lots of words to describe what we thought was a well-understood concept. And Colleen, of course, earlier was recommending this for things like workflow. Other words you can talk about is autonomy. What do you mean by empowered? That's a lovely one. Just how empowered are we? When? How often? What happens if we lose that? What do we do if we want to clarify it? So challenge these words when you hear them. The other thing we believe is that every case is different. Tough one for consultants, right? We love pattern matching. We love frameworks. We love to read books. And then generally, with a recency effect, whatever we've just read is what we want to be doing or applying. You may have an amazing sense for this, and that's part of the value of, all of you lot in the room, right? Is that experience and wisdom. However, it's often useful to turn that off for a minute and just think about what you can actually see and what you know, and then consider if what you're seeing is what is expected or if actually it's something new. So we often talk about this as being solution forced, where you bring in a solution from outside. It doesn't really fit, but you're trying to smush it in. Insert safe joke here, really. However, these things do have value, but not always. And generally, the more volatile or innovative the environment is or wants to be, the less relevant these things are, and the more useful it is to just start from first principles, figure out what's going on in a unique situation, and work out how to move towards it. And sometimes you don't need all this big upfront planning, which is often very disruptive and reduces capability in the short term, because you can just move in small steps when you know how to spot what is taking you in the right direction, which is also more sustainable. Okay. So, how on earth would you conclude a talk like this? I'm not sure, but thank you for coming along to my talk. It is called this. Remember that serious point. You will get challenged if you talk about solution focus to people and mention the word solution. So just remember the real essence of it, right? Remember about direction. Direction is crucial, especially. We talked about how solutions are the thing to give our attention to. What would you rather be an expert in? The problem or the solution? The way you want to go and what could make things better, or what happened in the potentially dim and distant past. You know, organisations have a long memory, and they will tell you that such and such a thing always happens, where maybe it only happened once 10 years ago. Think about the in-between, right? So work with what you see on the surface and what is there, and think about the interaction view. Don't try and profile, don't try and guess what's going on in people's heads. Or if you do, keep it to yourself and don't act off it. Make use of what's there. So amplify change, amplify what's working, look for things that are working already. We've often developed this problem sensitivity where that's what we look for. That's how we talk, and that's how we exchange information about what's going on. But so many things are working, and it's like an underdeveloped muscle, you know? We're so unused to celebrating what we do and talking about what's there. And, you know, even partial solutions, things that are partly working, tiny signs that it's working. Think about those possibilities, right? What else could happen? What else could you do? What else would help? Being bold and radical about that, and thinking about what you have in your past or around you that would help. Language. Keep it simple where possible. Again, bit of a balance, because there's certain corporate environments where it may be too simple too soon, and they might just think you feel you're disingenuous or not at their standard, as it were. And, you know, I've experienced that a few times. It is difficult, but definitely head towards, and where possible, use simple language. Remember that every case is different, because generally they are. You know, be wary of ill-fitting blueprints and excessive pattern matching. So we talked a little bit about finding what works and doing more of it as a sort of extra principle. This is a good example. I use this one for my cognitive bias talk, but I'm sure you can see at least one face, but there's actually around 9 in this picture. And if you look carefully, they'll start to pop out. And that's the kind of feeling that you can get when you switch from habitual problem-finding mode to finding solutions and looking forward. So if you're thinking about stuff, if you find yourself stuck and you want to ask yourself a question, you can ask yourself, what is wanted? What do I want? And maybe ask yourself that a few times. In a coaching session, we often spend time crafting that and thinking about it, because we often only have a very vague sense of what is wanted. But actually sharpening that up, knowing when and how much, as in how much of a thing, but also how much we want it, is incredibly useful for deciding if it's actually worth doing, for building on our strengths and motivating ourselves towards it. So it's like these illusions then. We tend to see one thing first, we tend to see the problem first, but if we're disciplined and a bit mindful, then we can start to see solutions and way forward. We don't believe in fixing people. You know, everyone's already got the resources they need to change, or a way to acquire them, or to signal that they need them. So we're not trying to fix anyone. That's important too. Again, in those personal interactions, oddly, if we take the human out of it and the ego out of it, we can be far more human and far more relatable, because we're not judging, we're not profiling. A serious point about this, anyone recognize this from the Lego movie, Cloud Cuckoo Land? Yeah, if you're annoyed by having the ting-tings in your head, you could go with everything is awesome from this. It's like a double earworm for you. Enjoy. But we don't live here. It's not a trite statement that says anyone can do anything at any time. It's grounded in the current situation and the reality, and taking small steps towards somewhere else. It's really important not to turn this into toxic positivity, and I want to highlight, as I'm having to skim through this, that it's not about that. It's very realistic, and that's why it works in organisations. There's no better example of problems over solutions than this. There is potentially a very visible problem here. But the people behind this, the person in the chair and their team are not thinking about the problem. There's no amount of thinking about the problem and diagnosis that will, return a missing limb, for example. But what they can do is think about what is wanted. They can think about how to play sport, how to play it well, how to direct their energy, and what to do next. And of course, we have all of these quite intangible problems in our organizations. We can't see them or visualize them as well as this. So this is kind of a reminder, and this is my invite to you then, is to go out and share this and then use it for yourself, but also use it with people that you have conversations at work or at home. When they're stuck, when they're a bit muddled, when they're not agreeing, find out what is wanted and encourage attention and conversation to go towards what is wanted and towards solutions. Normally at this point, I end with a quote from one of the famous tennis players, Williams, but today I've got a different quote, which is only about 3 hours old, which I really liked from Ines earlier. The answers are in the living beings around us. They're not in the fossils. So if you sense yourself sort of digging around in the dust to look at the past, look up, talk to living beings, and that's the way we'll get things done. Both in terms of work stuff and those hard and intangible problems around climate change as well. So, thank you for listening. Really appreciate your attention.
Hi.
Hello.
I think some of the things you were talking about, there's a thread from some earlier talks that maybe if you've all done that intentionally, well done. If you haven't, then well done anyway. I'm just making my own narrative in my head. But
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Suzanne was talking about Wardley maps and value streams. Someone mentioned before about the Cynefin framework, and I was thinking the very first talk that Colleen did with Denver Airport, I was thinking about the theory of constraints and measuring what matters. One book on my shelf, which I have actually read because it's a small one, is Obliquity by John Kay, which I think is similar to this, where he's talking about how goals are best achieved, not aimed at directly. And a challenge that I sometimes have with short attention spans with teams is how you make sure you have goals, measures, which are right for what you want to try and achieve, but not have that myopic focus on them and don't just make the measure the goal. Do you have any advice on how to encourage, how to make that happen, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is keep thinking like that. I'm not going to give you some glib off-the-shelf answer, but I think that's a really important thing to consider. An example is things like putting attention on sprint goals rather than the stories. The sprint goal expresses direction for a team across a 2-week period, right? Or equivalent. OKRs do that at a higher level. So I think there's something about defining those and defining direction at a high level and constantly checking in with that, but also checking in that that direction is still useful. I think it might have disappeared very quickly, but we go in that direction until we decide not to, and at which point promptly abandon that or pivot or adjust. So I think a slightly more concise answer to this question might be to try and frame it and then keep revisiting it, it being the direction. The risk is an over-specified directional goal is not motivating or interesting, and a too broad goal is too broad, and we can't figure out what to do to go towards it. So, yeah, keep investing in that area. It's a good track.